I'll do a sweep.
Okay. Maybe they're getting breakfast.
Oh,
I saw a light back there. That's all I saw. Dim, I saw a dim light.
Yeah, on YouTube.
Are you gonna sell these on Etsy?
No, so I've never sold a piece.
You should.
Yeah, my nephew Kurt was my very first customer. Actually placed an order for a cup with a handle, so I made that for him. I don't actually have a picture of him with it, but and then Andrea placed an order. But I just been giving them away. So yeah, I made Andrea a pencil holder. And quite a few people have paperclip dishes on their desk, like Howard has one.
Collecting everyone's work.
No, I don't have anything like that. No, actually, this is the first time I've actually like shown. I guess like all of them together. Yeah. I mean, I've taken photos and like put them on Instagram, but never with the intent to like sell them. But you know, like I've gone to like farmers markets and I'm like, I should just set up a little booth and then really cool. Yeah. So, okay, well, so I'll go ahead and get started, and I wanted to start with a couple photos of the studio that I go to here in Walnut Creek. It's through the Park and Rec with the city. So this is the slab table. This is where we can wedge our clay and get, as soon as you get the clay out of the bag, and you can, I should have brought some clay and I could have showed you, I didn't even think. Wedging it to get it ready to work with, to get it ready for the wheel, or if you're going to do some hand building.
You can't tell there, but that's plaster.
Yeah, it's a plaster table.
You can use it to pull water out of the clay too.
Exactly, thank you.
Wet clay on the table.
And then a scale, and then there's a wire tool on there that's similar to this that you can use to cut your clay. Okay, and then the wheels. I was trying not to get anyone's photo, but this is where we throw. And then this is a slab roller. So this is where you get your nice chunk of clay, you lay it out on a mat, and then you place it underneath that, this thing that pulls up, this cloth. And then you start to roll this big wheel. It's actually pretty fun. I always feel like I'm driving a ship doing it. But it rolls your clay out nice and flat, and then you can work with it. You can lay it over a plaster mold. You can carve into it, and that's how I did some of these things that are hand-built in the center, in my soap dish. And then I took this, sorry this is so small, but this is back in our glazing area. This is just a sample, and just what typically can happen when you mix different glazes on different types of clay. And Sam and Leanne and we've all learned that, you know, what you think you're going to get at the end doesn't always appear that way, and I'll show you some examples. But this is the glazing area, definitely messy and a lot of fun, but they're just in these big garbage can containers, and then we have drills that we stir and mix the glaze, and then you take and you can dip, you can get a pitcher and pour, however you want to apply your glaze. You can spray it. I forgot to take a picture of the spray booth.
That's always the hardest part to me.
Yeah.
Because you're always kind of like, I can put fingers on this part.
Yeah, and they have tongs that you can use, but a good example of when you use tongs and you still have a mark, so you can see where this is where I held onto it with the tongs. And even though like I took glaze on my finger and like rubbed it in, it still came out that way, but it's just definitely unique. But yeah, so even though you try to fill in, here's another example of I touched it when it was wet and it gave it some cool texture. But yeah, you just can't get away from that sometimes. But the glazing process is very unique. Like I showed you the examples of some of the tiles that you can come out, Definitely mixing glazes is tricky because sometimes the glaze will be too thick and then it'll run off. A good example of having too much glaze or a runny glaze is it'll stick to the kiln, and then you end up with this rough edge that you would, have to grind off eventually, but I never.
It's like glass, isn't it?
It's glass. So basically when you put the glaze on, it goes into the kiln, it heats up, I can't remember the temperature. It's really, really hot, and it melts the glaze like glass. So the nice thing to do, well, the good thing to do is at the bottom of your piece is to clean off. This is what you call the foot. To clean this off and even like rub your sponge like just over the edge of the piece at the bottom. That'll help keep the glaze from running down over. But with that piece that I was passing around, that glaze, it's called, that's Yellowbird that did that, and it's just a very runny glaze, and so you have to be really careful, and I should have cleaned it off more, but the piece wasn't very big, and it just puddled at the bottom. Okay, so, oh, and then these are just an example of our bisque carts. So after you throw and you trim, then it goes into the bisque kiln and gets bisque fired, and it comes out like this. So it's kind of tinny. It's not, you can tell the difference. So it's not quite as durable yet. And so once they go through that fire process and they get on these carts, and then it's like like manhunt to try to find your piece with everybody else's, because everybody else's comes out on the same carts. And then from there you can take that piece and glaze it. Okay.
Are there different kinds of clay?
There are. Yeah, so I've used, I probably used about 4 different types, but there's a ton. So like that's an example of porcelain, that's an example of Sagar, XX Sagar, and that's Kerry. So the difference is like some of them hold more grog.
What's that one?
That one is sandstone. So before it gets bisque fired like that, it's like a yellow mustard color.
Mustard,
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Like these are the different types of clay.
Oh yeah, I should have took a picture of that closer. Thanks, man. But yeah, so the different types of clay. So porcelain is really smooth. It doesn't have a lot of grit, and so it can be fun and easy to center on the wheel. But when you're pulling it and you're you're bringing it up, it can go, we call wonky. It can get off balance rather quickly because it doesn't have a lot of grog in it to hold it. But Sagar is a really great beginner's clay. I think, yeah, and it's just a little, I mean, you can just feel it. It's like kind of rough. Yeah, and that's really nice for beginners because when you're learning how to throw, it'll hold better, and it's easier to work with. So I have
Different clays are better for different things.
Yeah, so let me show a video of throwing to kind of give you guys a good understanding. Oh yeah, I should mute it. It's funny. Sam was my photographer. So this is me centering. I'm working with sandstone, so you can see it's like that yellowy, well, as soon as I move my hand, you can see it's kind of like a yellow mustard color. What you do is when you get it on the wheel, you start to apply some water, but you don't want to put too much water because then water can get underneath the clay and pull off the wheel, which I have an example of that happening. But you also want it to be wet enough that you can slide your hands up and down and let the clay move, but also being able to control it. So my right arm, I try to keep as steady as possible, and I kind of lean it on my thigh and against my body to kind of just keep that pressure on the clay while I'm centering it. So basically I'm working the clay and I'm going up and going down. I'm not using very much clay because as you can see, I like to make small things. So that's probably about a little over a pound of clay that I'm working with. But yeah, so centering is really important. You get it on the wheel. If you start throwing and it's not centered, then your piece will start to kind of look like a big boo-boo. So, so this is centering. I'm almost done, I think. And I was trying to hurry too, so I wanted to show this as a good example. No, this is just a lump of clay. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my finger and I'm making a hole down the center of the clay. This is so that you have somewhere to start pulling the clay. So I use my needle tool, which is laying up here, to kind of measure to see how much space I have between the bottom of the wheel and the top of my clay. You don't want to go down too far because once you start pulling the clay will continue to go down. And if you go down too far, before you know it, you're seeing the wheel and then you have a hole or a planter, as we like to call them. So here I am starting to pull it out, so you can see the sides are getting a little bit wider. And again, I like to make small example, but it isn't going to be a small cylinder. I use the sponge to clean out the excess water. You need to have the clay wet, but not too wet. And you don't want to leave water in the bottom of the pot because then that makes your piece more weak. The clay is going to keep absorbing water, so it's really important to keep that water kind of soaked up. And then I always have to make sure that your left hand or whatever hand you have inside the pot is nice and wet, and then you take the sponge and kind of squirt it down over the sides. So then you have a nice slippery surface to start pulling. And you take the sponge, well, again, I'm sopping up water. But you take the sponge on the outside, or your hand. A lot of people don't even use a sponge. I prefer. And then you guide your inside hand up against the wall of the clay and just kind of guide it all the way up to the top. Just using a nice slow continuous motion. If you start to skip over or you let off and you don't get back to the right spot, then you can kind of get sides that are a little wavy. So yeah, and then you just keep pulling until you get it as tall as you like, or as tall as the piece will allow. I usually start throwing with like something in mind, but as soon as I center it and I start pulling, I'm like, this is just going to be whatever it's going to be. So, and I think that makes it fun, unless I'm really trying to make a cup or something that someone's asked me to make. Otherwise, I just have fun doing it, and I just really like seeing what ends up coming out of it.
Tall paper clip dish.
Yeah, that's my signature piece, usually, paper clip dishes. But so you can start to see that the clay looks a little uneven on the top. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but that's what we call wonky. So it just means that the top isn't even, it's not straight across, and most likely the sides aren't that even either. But there is a way to correct that. You can either, what they call collaring it, where you take both hands and you push in the walls of the clay and you basically kind of not start over. But what I just did there was I took a needle tool and I just cut the top off. And then just taking a little bit more water, cleaning up my rim so that way it's not sharp or uneven.
So you've been doing ceramics prior to even being out here? Like you used to do them?
I actually started in Orange County. I did about 4 months. So I'll show you guys some pieces that I started out with. And then I've been doing at Walnut Creek since last January. So a little over a year and a half. Oh, there I'm using my rib tool just to kind of compress the sides and smooth it out. It gives it a nice texture, but it also helps solidify the clay and helps get some of that excess moisture out of the clay. Just doing some finishing touches. I think this is where I realize I don't have a tool. So what I'm, in a minute here, I'm looking for this. This is what I borrowed from a neighbor to cut off some of the excess clay.
Then you grab from a neighbor.
Thankfully Darcy had all her stuff laying out when she was beside me. But this is just, you basically take the sharp edge, well the straight edge I should say, down the side of the dish, and then down all the way to the wheel, and then it cuts off, helps get rid of that excess clay at the bottom. Then after that, then you take your wire tool, it's really high tech, and you wrap it around, and then you lay it on the wheel, and then you slide. You might have to do it a couple times. It just depends on how fast they stuck it is to the wheel, and then you lay it on a wooden board, and then we cover it and put it in one of the rooms to dry.
Now why multiple times? Is it just one cut?
Because it's sticking. Yeah. And then it'll slide off. Yeah, so that is throwing. This is a good example of when you get too much water going. This is actually carry that I'm using right now. Yeah, so I just had too much water, and yeah, it wasn't working out very well. Okay, so let me see. So basically, so that's throwing, and then I had a after you throw and it dries, it just depends how much you cover the clay. But we use plastic. It's usually on like a plywood board or something that helps soak up the water and the moisture out of the clay. Once it is what we like to call leather hard, where you can still kind of, you know, pick off clay, but it's not too hard, it's not too soft. Then you can do what we call trimming. And let me see, so basically you take your piece and you put like little chunks of clay, and you center it on the wheel again. So you have to get it on the wheel and just, you know, spin it, make sure that it's, what?
It's upside down, just so you know.
Yeah,
No.
you
flip the piece upside down.
Oh yeah, you flip the piece upside down. I was like, wait, is it flipped upside down? You flip the piece upside down, and then you have to center it again on the wheel. So again, if you don't have it centered the best that you can, then whatever foot, which is this bottom piece, whenever you start carving that, it'll be crooked too. So that's probably my least favorite part. But anyway, so then you take other pieces of clay and then you secure the piece onto the wheel with clay. So it kind of uses it like glue. This is just this is actually the finished version of it. And then you can carve your name or whatever you like, or I think Leanne uses a stamp. But here's the video. Again, I did this yesterday with one hand, so forgive me, it's a little goofy. And it's hard to do one-handed, because usually you should keep your one hand on the center of the pot while you're trimming, and then you can use different tools to take off the excess clay and to give it that shape. What I used to make that circle in the middle was this tool, and I just held it on, it went around, and that's where I kind of wanted to use as a guide of how much clay I want to take off from the outside, and then you start to clean off the inside and make that foot, which is what your piece will actually sit on. So it's important to keep it nice and flat and level, otherwise you have a wonky piece when it's sitting on a table. Okay, so I guess I can just walk you guys through. So this is an example of my very first piece that I ever made. This was in Orange County, so back in 2013. I'm so proud of this. It was my little salsa dish, and it's very small, and well, I mean, I've made other small things, but I was so proud to get this height on this thing. And then I used 2 different types of glaze, and I used to sign with a little JB. Now I'm putting the year on everything. And then this is probably my most perfect piece as far as the thickness. It's nice and smooth, and it's completely centered. So if you put this on a wheel and spun it, actually would be symmetrical. So this is probably the one that I'm most proud of, because I took my time, and yeah, and it just worked out really well. So I made this one at the end of last year. So you can see kind of like how I've progressed. Another example of trying to make cups, something that has function and that you can use other than paperclip dish. So this one I made, I want to say this is one of the very first ones I made when I started in Walnut Creek. So this was probably like January of last year. As you can see, it's a little crooked. I didn't learn how to cut the tops off and make them flat. I thought it was cool because it kind of had like a grip for your handle. I didn't mean to do that. It actually just worked out that way. But I thought this is a really cool cup, and then I started making these, and it's much lighter, it's thinner, it's proportionate, it's flat across the top, has a little detail on it. And also the clay makes a difference too. I mean, this is Sagar, so this is the one that has more grit in it. This is porcelain. But it's funny because this is actually what we call a rebay with a Cushing blue top. And this is also Cushing blue. So you can just see how glazes interact differently with different types of clay. But you can just see how one cut from another can work out with the one.
Jen, can those like go in the dishwasher or the
So
microwave?
all of this, with the exception of raku, which I'll show you in a second, is dishwasher, microwave, and oven safe because it's been baked. And everything's food and water safe. Except for raku, which is a different type of firing process and a glaze, like Leanne's holding up. These actually are very porous, so they won't hold water over a long period of time. But you can eat out of them. You just can't they just won't hold liquid. So you couldn't use this as a planner or a cup or anything like that. What happens with this is whenever they're at the bisque stage, you put a different type of glaze, raku glaze, on these, and then they go into an open fire, and they're put, I think it's like 1100 degrees or something like that, for about an hour. And then what you do is you take newspaper and you rip it all up. And I wish I had a video of this. We're gonna do this week. You rip the newspaper. Oh, you do? You rip up the newspaper and you lay it like in a sand or an ash pit. And then you take your piece with tongs, of course, because it's like scalding hot. Put it into the ash pit with the newspaper, and then you cover it. And so, like the oxidation and the just
So it catches fire, and
yeah,
then you put something over it to kind of starve it, and it oxidizes.
with the newspaper. So, and then you get these really cool like finishes. And then the clay that's not glazed turns black. So you kind of see. And then when you can hear they're kind of tingy. They're not nearly as strong as something that went through the whole glaze in the regular kiln process.
Is that how you got this one?
Yeah, that's also, these are both raku as well. And you can tell really quickly when you turn it over and it's black. Yeah.
3, 4, 1.
Whoa, what is that?
So, okay, so yeah, so this is the raku kiln. So basically that will raise up with like a pulley system, and then it's just open flame. It's really, really hot. We lay our pieces on. There's Leanne's piece and her feathers, and I think mine's on the right. Actually, I think I might be picking mine up there.
Yeah, I think you are the round one or the
one,
or the one in the air.
that one
Yeah.
right.
That
That
looks
one
like a
right
gem
there
piece.
is this right
That
here.
one's mine, that one that's like halfway up.
So that's this one. So basically, yeah, they get really super hot, and then you lay them into the ash pits with the newspaper.
I was just really picking at my feathers.
Yeah, so there you can see the newspaper.
And it's like immediately sets on fire underneath.
Yeah, it'll catch fire, so you get flame. I'm so glad you took pictures of this. Good job.
Yeah, I had somebody do it for me. I just think it's such a cool process.
It's really cool.
There's
And the other thing about raku firing is there's no guarantee that your piece isn't going to break. So if someone's piece is still wet, so we actually have to, after you put the glaze on, it goes into what we call warming kiln. And that is just so the glaze can properly dry and it gets the piece warm. So just like you don't put anything hot in glass because it could shatter, it's kind of the same process. And so what happens is we put it in the warming kiln and then it goes into the raku kiln. If someone's piece was still wet or had a big air bubble in it or just had some sort of moisture or whatever, it can explode. It can pop. When that happens, it could break anything around it. And so we've seen, some of our classmates have lost pieces in the kiln. So our instructor is always telling us, don't raku something that you're like really like in love with, and you wouldn't be upset if, you'd be really upset if something happened to it. So the pieces that I did raku that are coming around, there are pieces that I was like, well, I've made several of those, and I wouldn't have been upset if something happened to them. So, but that's the raku process. We usually do that at the very end of class because they cool down fairly quickly. So probably 15-20 minutes you can touch them, and then you can take them home at the same time. The process for everything else is, you have your first week, now this is if you're taking a class and you're only there once a week. The first week you would throw, the second week you would trim, the third week you would glaze, and the fourth week you could pick up. So it takes about a month for each one of these pieces to come out. If the kiln is keeping up with the supply, the demand of how many people are in the class and throwing. So I just have a couple more examples. This is an example of using the exact same clay combination. This is actually, they're both porcelain. Yeah, so they're both porcelain. I dipped this into what we call yellow bird, and then I did an overcoat of what's called chino. Chino is a type of glaze that can get I call them like little pock marks. It's kind of like, it has some texture to it.
Bad skin.
The glaze is really frothy, so whenever you mix it all up, there's a lot of like bubbles, and it really gives a cool texture. There was a woman in the class, I have to bring this up because I proved her wrong, that she was like, you don't ever put chino over top of another glaze because it just doesn't react well. Shino is very thick and like it gives that texture. Well, I tried it because I was like, well, you know, I wanted to see what would happen. So I dipped this into Yellowbird, and then I dipped it quickly into the Shino, and it came out this really cool, smooth finish. And then a week later, I'm like, I'm gonna do that again. And so I dipped this into Yellowbird. The one mistake I made, I didn't let the Yellowbird dry as much as I did this one. And I dipped it into Shino, and then because the underglaze wasn't dry, it just never was drying. And again, this is a good example of being in a hurry. Class was ending, and I had touched it a couple times. So I ended up just taking a paintbrush and trying to brush out where I kept touching it. But you can see just even on the inside where I didn't do that, how different these two are. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. I'm sorry, Christine, you're getting quite a collection over here. This is an example of just another example of how I've grown as a potter, or a potterista, as I like to call it. Trying to make a bowl or a cereal bowl. I thought this was like really like great when I first made it. I probably made this like last March or April. So I was really proud of it. It wasn't very deep, but I'm like, it looks like a bowl. Like it looks like you could eat out of it. Well, you can. And then this one I just made probably within the last couple weeks. So you can see where definitely in weight, how different. I've learned how to take more clay off when I'm trimming, but I've also learned how to use more of the clay when I'm throwing and keeping the excess clay off and making it more smooth, more symmetrical. And understanding that when you flip something over and you start trimming, you actually can take a lot more off than you think. And I used to be really afraid of doing it because I thought, oh, I don't want to end up with a hole, and I don't want to, I don't want to take too much off. So I really started to learn what you can and can't do, and it's really started to show in my pieces. Oh, and then the last part is hand building, and so these are things like I was saying. You use a slab roller, you lay it over a plaster mold. This is a good example of using tools to texture. So what I did was, it was like a big rubber stamp that I think was called like tiger print or something, like tiger stripes. And I just kept working it and laying it over the clay, and it gave this nice texture. And then I used what's called blue-black glaze, and then I just took a sponge and like started to wipe off, and it gave it this really cool technique, and actually has like these like little flecks of gold.
Because it's a really neat glaze.
Yeah, it's really a fun glaze. And then again, my example of where you can see the tongs. Oh, and then I've hand built, this is my pride and joy, my little soap dish. So I'd seen something on Pinterest, so I was trying to make stuff for my bathroom. I have a ton of these, like holding Q-tips and cotton balls and makeup brushes and toothbrushes, and but I wanted a soap dish, and so I had found something on Pinterest that was like similar, but this is all hand built, and I attached, I should be talking about that. So you can attach things to your clay. It's called slipping and scoring. So I rolled out these little balls. This is exactly how you make mugs as well. You take take your needle tool, mark out on the clay, and use a little bit of water and make what we call slip. So it makes like a glue, basically. And then you do that on the other side of the piece that you're trying to attach. And then you stick it on there, and then you can use a brush and kind of clean off and smooth out the edges. So on a mug, actually this is a good example. This is bisque fire, but you can see where I attached it, and then I just took a paintbrush and smoothed it out. So then at the end, then it looks like one of the finished mugs. So yeah, you can attach handles. Leanne made a really cool casserole dish that looked like an octopus, that she was slipping and scoring and attaching things to. In addition to attaching things, you can carve things. Like these are ones that these are the ones I use different carving tools. Like Leanne's holding up, I made that for Gina for her birthday. It's a tea light holder. So yeah, you can put holes in things. There's just the sky's the limit. I mean, everybody's creative in their own right, and yeah. So there's just a ton of things you can do. I think I showed everything. Oh,
How'd you cut those holes in there?
with one of these.
Just pop.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you just have to clean them out, and then you can see where then when you glaze, you have to kind of redo it to make sure the glaze isn't stuck in there. But yeah, and I think, oh yeah, and I've made a plate. So I've tried to make different things. It's very heavy. Thank you, Kelly. But I think my most favorite piece, this one, I don't know why, but he's like my favorite for some reason. I like the shape. It's celadon. There's a couple other celadons. My other favorite color is the gray bird, which is this bowl, the soap dish. That's gray bird. Yeah, those are some of my favorites. I really like teals and blues, but I've tried to use different colors.
The Cushing is also very pretty.
The Cushing, the deep blue.
Mm-hmm.
The red is really tough because Kelly, did you pick up that red one? So that's called copper red, what Kelly has in her hand.
It's really pretty too.
That glaze is awesome, and I think, Howard, your paperclip dish is red too. I think I made one for Phil in red. But the red is really hard to get to turn red. So we have to use in the low firing, low oxidation or whatever, or reduction, to try to get it to react and do that. This is an example of it not doing that. So this is, again, same exact glaze, but it turned out green and red. Yeah, and you know, when I first saw it, because I was making this for someone, and it was supposed to be red, and when I first saw it, I was kind of disappointed, because I was like, how did that happen? It was supposed to all be red. But my instructor was telling me that this is actually more unique, because I could never recreate this again. So if I tried to get a piece to come out like this, it's just not going to happen. And so it gave it really character. Actually did not give it away then, I kept it. But that's just another example of glazes doing different things. That's why I think it's so fun. You just can't be too disappointed with the outcome, and just appreciate it for what it is and what it comes out to. And this was probably sitting next to something that was really big, and you know, it didn't get even heat. There's a couple different things that could have happened.
Like just the off-gassing of the glaze
I
next
think
to it, they
the
will
one
react with each
by
other.
Rich's hand, the little celadon one, you can see there's like a dark like ring on the bottom. And again, that was probably just sitting next to something that interacted with that. Otherwise, the glaze was perfect. So you just can't have that expectation that no matter what you do in there, it's going to come out the way you think. But for the most part, everything has. It's been a really fun and great experience to just see how I've grown, how a mug has been so heavy, like you wouldn't want to use it as a mug, where, you know, now this is actually nice and light and you can pick it up. Yeah, but I plan on doing this for a long time. I need to start doing something with these pieces because my house is full. This is, I'd say I still have about 20 pieces at home, and then I've probably given away like close to 25 to 30 pieces over my career doing this. And eventually, I really want to have my own wheel and have my own kiln. It's just, going to a studio is really convenient because, as you can see, it can be very messy. The glazes, there's an art to making glaze. Some people make their own, you know, they go out and dig and make their own clay. People make their own glazes, so not all of it is store-bought, but yeah, that's what I aspire to.
The glaze is that it is like a chemical reaction, so you can actually formulate your own glazes by taking these different elements together, and then they're all bound with silica, which is which what makes glass at that high heat. But when you dip it, and depending on the glaze, like it's almost like the consistency of like pancake batter, like depending on the glaze. Some are a little bit thinner, some are a little bit thicker, and it's just really a trip to watch because it's also you see the clay absorb the water that's in the glaze, and it's just like it dries and becomes chalky within seconds. It's a very neat process.
Yeah, I wish I had a video of glazing. Oh, and then we also try to keep like a book or a sketchbook or something that we can keep track of the clay, the type of clay you're using, the glaze mixtures that you're using. It's kind of helpful if you want to try to do something very similar. I think the only time that two glazes came out the same were those two gray birds, that one and that one. Those are my only two that actually came out more like a set. Everything else had some other type of reaction, and it looks different. They did not. They were two separate firings, so it's very rare that they came out so similar in color. But yeah, we try to keep a little book just to show what clay you're using and the glaze and the dates, because if you don't take photos or write down what you're expecting to come out of the kiln, sometimes it can be hard to find your pieces with everybody else's in there. So
Yeah, and you're looking for a red glaze, but it actually came out green. Happens to be
yeah,
a lot of,
exactly.
like,
You might
looking
not
for
realize, like, actually, I looked over this because I wouldn't have expected it to look like this, and I'm like, I should have a red mug here. Does anyone see it? I usually find Leanne's pieces, and she usually finds mine, or vice versa with Sam, because I don't know why, but you flip them over and you're like, oh, I thought this was mine. It's not. Or that is mine. I'm really surprised. But yeah. Oh, and then I have a little pottery book that I got, but it just goes through all the steps, has a DVD in it, and I thought that'd be really helpful when I start going on my own. I don't have an instructor in front of me, but I follow things on Instagram, YouTube. You know, there's a lot of different places to get
When
inspiration.
did you get started on
So I was living down in Irvine, and I've always was interested in pottery. It has nothing to do with the movie Ghost, because everybody asks that. But I was always interested in it, and I've always liked dishes. I used to collect Fiesta ware. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but I used to collect that, and so I've always been fascinated by it. But when I was living in Irvine, I didn't really know anyone, and I thought this would be a really great way to be social and meet people, and then also start a hobby. And then I wanted, to have pieces that I could give to my family. So I had got started. I actually made a really cool teapot, and I have a picture of it somewhere. I'll try to find it. But and I gave them away as Christmas gifts the first year. And then Phil recruited me, and I moved up here. So I left that studio, but there was about 6 or 7 of us in that studio that was in the class I was in. I made really great friends, and I knew that I really wanted to get back into it. And then when I came up here, for the first year, obviously I was pregnant, I couldn't do this, but Darcy had got me a gift certificate for my birthday for Walnut Creek, and that just kind of gave me that push I needed to get into it again, and then I've been doing it ever since. So whenever I move again, I really want to continue and try to find another spot, and then eventually when I have a house or a garage or somewhere that I can have my own stuff, then I can keep doing it. But I don't need a big kiln because I like to make little things, so. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you shouldn't make any too much more until you move.